take every piece of unsolicited advice with a huge grain of salt. So especially on LinkedIn, I mean, like LinkedIn is like a sea of all of these things of like, if you're not doing it this way, you're doing it wrong. Buy my course.
Hey, Tom, so you're doing a startup. What's your startup called? What's it about? And why do software engineers care about it?
Cool. So I'm building a startup called Ocuroot. That's Ocuroot. I said I shouldn't spell things out, but everyone always asks me how it's pronounced. So the problem that I'm looking to solve is one that I was having in my last job. We were a sort of mid-sized B2B company. We had a few hundred engineers, but we had a ton of production environments. We had like points of presence. We wanted to have something in the EU. We were considering doing GovCloud stuff. And in particular with the EU, it was a really big job to create new environments and to manage them. So, it took us a really, really long time to get this environment stood up because we were always waiting for the infra team needs to set up the accounts, they need to set up the networking, and then, database team needs to come in and all that kind of thing. And even though we were doing a lot of sort of self-serve stuff by that time, there was still a lot of things that had to be primed for us. And what it sort of boiled down to for me was that we really needed a tool to automate our automations. We were using things like Terraform, and we used Nomad instead of Kubernetes, which was a really interesting challenge for us because like all of the tooling is built for Kubernetes these days. And so we had these automations that would take inputs and outputs, but they were all kind of like standalone. And if you've ever worked with a really, really big Terraform module, you'll know that it can be like painful and slow. So what I'm looking to build with Ocuroot is a kind of a layer on top of CI/CD that helps you connect together all of your resources. So that if you have clusters, if you've got databases, if you've got DNS configuration and your applications, those can all be glued together, and the software can figure out what order to put things in. If things change, if you want to like add a little bit of memory, you don't need to go in and edit your code. You can just make a little bit of a tweak to your intent. So the dream there is to just make the developer experience better and make it easier to get started and to build up these complex environments.
So it sounds like the developer in your case is doing a lot of system administration, a lot of setting up the environments at quite high level, and at a level that a lot of software engineers won't necessarily have access to. So kind of what's the typical software engineer or developer that you're targeting there?
Yeah, so I'm looking at, like I said, similar to the company that I used to work for, a few hundred engineers. They've probably got an infra team separate, but they're trying to do DevOps in kind of like the classical way of like you build it, you run it. And you will need to manage challenges like you mentioned of not having access to absolutely everything. So you've got to encapsulate things, you've got to create standardized ways of doing things, like that golden path that everyone's always aiming for. One thing that I'm looking to put in the coming months is a module system. So, if you've got a platform team or you've got an infra team who can write a bit of code, they can create a wrapper. So you can just add a couple of lines of code to get a database, and it'll all be done in the right way without having to have a template that you go back and change every few months.
So this is going to sit above something like Terraform then, or CloudFormation?
So I guess it could be considered to be a layer between those tools and your CI tools. So it would sort of run on top of something like GitHub Actions or TeamCity or Circle CI, what have you. Or Jenkins. There's still a lot of Jenkins out there I've been learning recently. And so those would help kind of orchestrate everything. And when things are supposed to run, they will run, and then Ocuroot will figure out the right work to do, and it will act as a wrapper around the tools like Terraform, CloudFormation, or Helm, perhaps, and execute those at the right time, doing the right things.
So is this an on-premise solution or your cloud-based solution?
So kind of both. I guess that's sort of the goal that I'm aiming for. Like The on-premise solution is sort of the first thing that I'm putting out there. I'm working on getting an open source release out that sort of is client only, kind of similar to the initial model you have with Terraform. And you can set up a state store in maybe a Git repo or perhaps a storage bucket. And then you'll configure your CI system to work with that content for you. But I'm also working on a hosted server solution, which is similar to what I had during the alpha that I've completely redone. So people don't have to work quite so hard in setting everything up from the get-go.
So who are your competitors for Ocuroot then? Are there other companies that you're competing against, or are you mainly competing against in-house solutions and, say, a platform engineering team?
Yeah, so I would say I would like to be helping a platform engineering team rather than competing with them. I think there's aspects of competition in kind of all the tools that people are using for builds and deployments. It's easy to say. I mean, people have even said that I'm effectively competing with Terraform, even though you can use Terraform in Ocuroot because of some of the overlap in what I do. The biggest competition directly, though, are sort of the all-in-one deployment tools, things like Octopus or Harness, and to an extent, Argo CD. They're doing some really great stuff with GitOps for Kubernetes. I'd like to bring a bit of that magic back so people can use it for other tools.
And where are you at in this journey of being a founder? Is it just you still? Have you got other people? Are you raising funding? What's this journey been like for you?
Yeah, it's still just me. I've been going for actually almost exactly a year. I incorporated the company a year ago yesterday, as of recording.
Right, cool.
Yeah, it's been a learning experience. I've been chatting to a lot of potential users, been chatting to a bunch of VCs, been chatting to other founders, and that's really the kind of the mode that I've been in for this past year is all about learning. I had these grandiose ideas early on of like, oh yeah, I'm going to get funding immediately. I'm going to hire a big team and all this kind of thing. I'm like, I don't really need to do that. I can, I've got enough resources myself to take it slow for a little while and sort of figure out that this is something that I really want to dedicate a lot of time to.
So what would be maybe the 2 or 3 lessons that you would go back and tell yourself from a year ago, or that you'd tell to other people that are software engineers thinking of founding their own business these days?
Yeah, take every piece of unsolicited advice with a huge grain of salt. Especially on LinkedIn. I mean, like LinkedIn is like a sea of all of these things of like, if you're not doing it this way, you're doing it wrong. Buy my course. And it can be really disheartening if like everything you're seeing is saying that, you're not doing this, so you're obviously wrong and you're going to fail. And sort of being aware of where all of that is coming from and the perspectives that a lot of this advice is coming from, I think is important because it's very easy to lose your own self and your own identity and all of that. I've tried doing some things for marketing that are not me. It's stuff that like me personally, this is not who I am and this is not who I want to be. And because of that, it did not work at all. Whereas there are other approaches that I feel much more comfortable with, and I really need to double down on those and sort of make the most of who I am and what I'm capable of doing.
Cool. So one of my favourite, for lack of better words, bits of unsolicited advice to give anyone starting a business is talk to customers. And again, this comes from a place of, I started my first business in 2001. I met a lot of people that were starting businesses then, having just been laid off. And I saw a lot of those people take their redundancy payout, maybe some excess cash out of their property, they remortgaged, put out 50 to 100 grand into starting a business, and most of them lost it all. And for many of them, it's because they were a bit excited in the dot-com boom at the time, whizzed off, really excited, I've got this best idea, everyone's going to love it. They never talked to a customer. And they spent ages building something, never talked to a customer. As soon as they put it in front of customers, the customers were either indifferent or outright said, no, I don't want that. That's not the problem. The problem is this thing over here. So from that, I have personally always tried to validate my business ideas and talk to customers. And I've encouraged people to always talk to the customer or talk to customers as much as possible. and get some genuine validation. So that's one bit of advice that I would offer every would-be entrepreneur, whether they ask for it or not, mainly from painful experience that I've seen. How do you feel about that? How's that worked out for you?
Yeah, that in itself is a great piece of advice, and I think that the way that it can be phrased can be part of the issue. Is sort of go out and talk to customers. Fantastic advice. Go out and talk to customers by doing this, or pick up the phone, harass 50 people every hour, that kind of thing. Like that's the kind of advice that I have issues with. And for me, like, realizing what talking to potential users and potential customers actually means has been sort of one of the more important discoveries that I've made. Is that initially I was like very, very formal about it, reaching out to a bunch of people, mostly people that I knew through my career, and having these very well planned conversations. Read the mom test at a recommendation of a friend, and asking all these questions. I felt like, oh, great, I'm learning really good stuff. I was writing all that down, and it felt like that was the only thing that mattered. But I go to a lot of events now, partly because I have an excuse to now, which is kind of nice. I can go get some free drinks. But for me, those are the real valuable conversations, is when I can sort of like connect with someone in a very, very casual way, build up a discussion about their experiences, kind of relating it to the things that I care about, and sort of getting a more unfiltered and unguarded response. Saying unguarded makes it sound very sneaky. I mean, the general thing, I think that there's a lot to be gained from just like genuine relationships. Especially with all the AI going around now, I think that's what people are really starved for. And so I want to be having much more genuine conversations with people. And it might take a little bit longer, but when I get to that nugget of meaning, it's going to be a lot more useful than a series of form questions that I wrote down.
So isn't that really the point of the mum test, though, is to try and have that unguarded conversation, but in such a way that, I think as you phrase it in the mum test, your mum couldn't lie to you? Because, for most of us, our mums like us. So if we go, hey, mum, this is a cool business idea I'm going to do, most of our mums are going to go, oh, that's awesome, people love that, which might then give you a false sense of security that this is a good idea, where, that stranger or that person, if you're not telling them your idea, but as per the mum test, kind of getting their feedback on the problems they face, they can't tell you your idea is good or bad because they don't know what it is. They can tell you about the pain point they have or the issue that's really bugging them. And if they're sitting there talking about, CI/CD is a real pain, you can think, I've got something here. If they're sitting here going, I don't care about CI/CD, we don't do it, you've got that other message that maybe they're not your target audience or something, or maybe you can ask about another pain point they've got, and that might give you some feedback or some insight into a different product you should build. Or did you interpret the mum test a different way?
No, I don't think we're at different positions here. I think what for me, this is the difference between a philosophy and a prescription of how to do something. And like as you said, the point is like getting people unguarded and sort of like being able to get to the root of what they need and sort of make the conversation about them. Whereas early on, what I was doing was I was asking a set of linear questions based on things that were in the book that, actually, got me some results, but it wasn't as real or spontaneous as it could be. And whereas I've found myself in a position now where I can have a loose conversation over a beer and actually like get to a point where, oh, hang on a minute, there's something here that I've never considered before. Let's really drill down onto that. And it's much more natural and comfortable.
So I think that's one of the problems with the mum test, isn't it? It's a very short book. Mm-hmm. It's very signal in some areas, shall we say, because it's so short. But it tells you what you should be doing, but not necessarily in that detail of how to. So you've kind of got to go and do it a few times and make the mistakes and learn, I guess, how you apply it in your own way, how you ask those questions in your own way. Otherwise, I think it could be quite easy to come across as quite stilted and quite robotic and sounding like you're going through a script with somebody. Yeah. And as though you're trying not to tell them your idea and kind of almost coming across a bit secretive. And I don't want to tell you, but I want to ask you lots of questions.
Yeah, and sometimes people are like really eager to hear your idea,
Yeah.
And you have to get into a place where you can tell them just enough to get them interested and get them asking questions so that you can sort of have them lead you to the right places based on their needs.
Cool. And on that, what have you learned from talking to people? How big a problem are people telling you that CI/CD in enterprise is?
It can be very variable. And the biggest thing that I'm taking away is that, like, not everyone has the same problems. Not everyone has problems. And there are so many different ways that organizations can approach problems like CI/CD and DevOps as a whole that there's like probably never going to be a one size fits all solution for everybody. Like I had a conversation with someone where they were, flat out, they're basically saying, "Why would I need your product?" And I'm like, "Hey, well, this is reverse validation. I've identified that you're not an RDL customer," and that was because of the way that they structured their team. They had a complete separation between the people deploying the code and the people writing the code. Still exists in a lot of places, and there's a few themes of things that I'm hearing. Is that, like, if you are like B2C or you're very well established, you've probably figured something out. Your engineers may be a little frustrated, feel like they're on old technology, feel like they're not doing the latest and greatest, but it works. Don't worry about it. That's fine. As organizations are growing and they're finding that they're sort of outgrowing their existing solutions, that's when they're feeling the most pain with these kinds of tools. Like when you're adding new environments, when you're bringing on new kinds of customers, like you start to sell to a bank and all of a sudden they have all of these requirements for your SDLC. And those seem to be the places where there's much more appetite for change in the tooling that you're using. And if I want to just hit on something that everyone's annoyed by, I just start talking about YAML, and then we can go from there. Everyone hates YAML.
I have no problem with YAML. I seem to be quite unique in that. It's not something I have a strong opinion about either way. Yeah, I think you hit on something there. And my experience of this has been that there are lots of different problems that companies have. And, it's very easy if you look on social media or in a lot of the blog posts or, a lot of discussions to see people talking about software architecture as though everybody has the same architecture, everybody has the same problems, and scale is, we're going to build it out and we're going to have more and more data centers or more and more servers, and that's as simple as it is. I mean, what a lot of people miss in the scaling thing, and I think you hinted at this, and something that I've seen is that maybe you're having different environments because you've got to deploy a data center in US or in the US cloud for dealing with US customers, and you've got to deploy something in Europe for dealing with European customers, and you've got to do something in Australasia for customers in that part of the world. And you're not really doing it for scale. You're not really doing it for failure and resilience. You're doing it to comply with keeping data in specific jurisdictions or keeping it out of specific jurisdictions. So you might have a very big solution, should we say, but not actually necessarily scale in the sense of, Google or Meta or anything like that. More case in that you've got lots of small solutions for different jurisdiction. Sort of sounding like that was a problem that you had in your previous company and that kind of inspired this.
Yeah, definitely. Because we over time, we were definitely scaling the amount of like raw traffic and the amount of compute that we were using and all that kind of thing. But like our teams would, they knew how to do that. Those were like problems that are well understood. There was capacity planning meetings. There was a whole process around this kind of thing. And it was the shifts in business that were really where the other kinds of scaling problems came in. Where I mentioned like banks demanding things in your SDLC definitely happen. Moving into areas like healthcare where you have different kinds of regulation. That's
you mentioned
the
GovCloud as well, so starting to do with probably governments that want their stuff in a certain jurisdiction, or people are dealing with stuff in Europe that want it in AWS's European sovereign cloud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the GovCloud thing is like probably, from what I have seen, the most extreme example of this, because you get into positions where you use certain platforms and you will be agreeing to rules like you can only make changes every 2 weeks and it has to be signed off by a human being. And we were in a position where we were deploying to production 200 times every single day, and we were very proud of that. We're like, well, why are we going to go back to doing that? Is there not another way?
No, I've seen similar things with a company I was dealing with a few years ago was, very keen for AWS's sovereign cloud. But then that was going to have other restrictions on the business in that only employees based in Europe would be able to access that and deploy to it and so on. For kind of defeats the purpose if you've got employees outside the European jurisdiction that have access to it, because it wouldn't give you that sovereignty anymore. So again, that whole introduced complexity that we don't necessarily think about when we're just building software.
Yeah, and people often find that sort of complexity, like they assume that it's absolute. So those sorts of restrictions where it's like only people based in the area can access the data. As soon as you start poking around at like what the data actually means, you then find out it's actually a very small subset of things. You can probably engineer around it so that for the most part, you can have access, and as long as you're protecting the things that they really care about, they're okay with that. But a lot of people never engage in those conversations.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, they get quite complex and muddy in a sort of misunderstanding. And that's the kind of time where I've sometimes seen the lawyers get involved and the tech people and the lawyers talking to each other and neither quite understanding the other domain and being able to communicate clearly. That's where you need a good bunch of lawyers who can explain what it really means in clear English, and a business savvy bunch of techies that can ask the right questions of the lawyers when they're not quite hitting the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
Again, back to that thing I talk about a lot of time, that we need to have that wider knowledge than just tech. We need to be able to learn to speak the language of the business so that we can understand these different issues and be aware of them, that there are things that impact technology that are to do with people, to do with governments, to do with laws, to do with things that aren't purely technical.
Yeah, I feel like there's a cultural challenge that we have in the tech space, that a lot of engineers feel like engineering is the be all and end all and sort of the most important thing, and losing sight of why a business is really there, or like, everything that is involved outside of their little production environment, of what's going on. And just being able to talk to the other parts of the business can bring huge benefits. And like,
Yeah,
this is why, like, go to the happy hour and talk to the lawyer, talk to the salesperson. You might have a fun conversation.
yeah, absolutely, and finding that mutual understanding can be so beneficial. I've seen this in the past where I've been along and I've been told, oh, well, there's no money for this, that, and the other. Go and corner the CFO at happy hour and say, why have we got no money for this? And they're like, what do you mean we got no money for that? Like, well, that's what I've heard from this senior manager. It's like, okay, well, what's the problem? Explain the problem tonight. Oh my God, yeah, of course we'll invest in that. So it's about having those conversations and, as you say, learning to speak to them and getting engaged at that level. Same with sales teams. I've moaned about salespeople saying things that we don't do in the past, but when you then go and talk to them and say, hey, why are you selling these things? And, oh, every customer asks for it. It's like, well, why the hell are we not putting that in the product then? Why are we missing that disconnect and creating this friction internally when we could be raising and getting more engineers in front of the customers or product owners or whoever's appropriate and understanding the customer's need? Then we can build a better business, because ultimately we're here to make the customer happy. So we create value for them and we capture some of that value for ourselves.
Yeah, your point about getting engineers in front of customers, that's something I wish would happen significantly more. I mean, like you say, like, founders don't get in front of potential customers enough. Like, people should be putting their engineers like in at least sitting in on a meeting or two. Because I've been in the position so many times where, like, people thought that I didn't want to talk to the customers, or I'd only get put in front of the customers when they were really, really angry. And it's a shame, because, like, you mentioned those phrases like, all of our customers are asking for this. Well, as an engineer, what I'm now thinking is like, well, how are they asking for this? And do they have slightly different needs here? And maybe what they really want is actually something much simpler that they can apply to this use case, rather than like overfitting to each individual customer, or like to a cohort that's actually bigger than you thought it was.
Yeah, I mean, as a classic example of this, I joined a company several years ago that were doing very clever AI optimization tools for networks. And awesome solution. We solved some really interesting problems, and we sold the software ultimately to Facebook and Apple and a few others. But a lot of the sales process blocked because a lot of the companies we're talking to weren't at the level to deal with what we solved. You know, we were coming in, it's like, we can optimize your global telco network and you can figure out where to put all your stuff and this, that, and the other. And most of the network engineers that we talked to were like, I don't even know where my network is. I've got an Excel spreadsheet somewhere that's got some lat long bits in it. I just love to be able to see my network on a map. And after I'd heard that 3 or 4 times, I said to one of the software engineers in my team, can we just like load their data and overlay it on Google Maps? And that opened up so many discussions. And it was, I don't know, it took him a day or two to code it. But it got so many people excited because it solved a real pain point they had. You know, and our software was 5 or 6 pain points beyond what they were doing. The first thing was like, where the hell is my network? Secondly, can I just visualize the traffic load on it? So can you just draw my network now with, you know, green for there's plenty of bandwidth, orange for it's, you know, over 50%, and red for there's no bandwidth left. And just these simple things that, and then enable them to actually take up the rest of the product.
Mm-hmm.
And again, by putting engineers in front of customers, we could find out those pain points. And most of them were trivial to solve compared to the complexity of our solution. And, you know, they enabled a lot more sales pipeline. They enabled us to move forward and do more things. So such simple things to do when you get people talking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so going through the alpha process with building Ocuroot, I initially was looking at things from a perspective of, okay, the primitives are build, deploy, environment. And so you've got the relationship between the deploy and the environment, builds off here. You just do that once, right? No, people don't just do builds once. You're like, you're looking at like, people want to do matrix builds with all kinds of different platforms. They maybe want to like do some builds of binaries, test those binaries separately, and then build a Docker image. And then there's all kinds of different packaging. Maybe you got to drop it off on a Windows machine to do some sort of like secure signing. Maybe you've got like a piece of hardware that you can only do the signing on. And it turned out that there were so many more complicated use cases out there. And I started noting all these down. I'm like, oh my God, I've got to add feature after feature after feature to do this. I'm like, well, wait a minute. No, what I actually want to do is just be able to deploy at run a build at any point. Don't call it a build. Just like, it's a generic thing. You just do some work. And your deployment's the special thing. Does the deployment have to be that special? I don't know. Maybe I can. And I ended up coming up with something that is, on the face of it, significantly more simple than what I had before. But it allowed people to sort of layer on their own complexity much more effectively. And, I ended up taking out a bunch of features because, people could sort of effectively emulate those features themselves by configuring things in certain ways.
Interesting. So when you started that discussion, I was thinking, are you in danger of over-engineering and creating thousands of features when most people just use one? But then it kind of sounded like you almost ended up at that Steve Jobs approach. It was like, I'm going to build something that's got, play or shuffle. I think it's on the iPod Shuffle, and that's all that most people need. Which sort of end have you settled at there?
I think I guess it's more, and this is probably a dangerous thing when you have the buttons that do more than one thing. I think the approach that I'm looking at is probably closer to just having that one button, because let's say this is very contrived. This is going to be an awful example, but let's say someone wants to be able to slow down their music and just slow it down. Maybe they just hit the play button a bunch of times, so they pause and play it in rapid succession. But it's that kind of thing. It's more like getting down to the absolute primitives that are needed for what I want to do. And because of the way that I'm approaching the SDK, rather than having to, I mentioned YAML, rather than having a YAML DSL, I'm just using a variant of Python. So if people want more complex behavior, they can write more complex behavior. And if they want me to provide something ready canned, I can just send them a file that has the function in it to do the work.
Okay, so you'd almost create a library of, this is your happy path, your golden path. But if you want to deviate, if you want to do things, you've got a whole programming language almost that you can be more flexible in.
Yeah, Yeah, I've always believed a lot in sort of like the escape hatch for the power user. Like working in my previous job, I was like trying to satisfy, a few hundred developers, provide them with the tooling that they need. And it would always come down to two or three incredibly senior, incredibly technically talented people saying, but it doesn't do this. And I do this all the time. I'm like, yeah, you're the only ones who do this all the time. I'm gonna give you enough access so you can sort of break out and do that if you want to, but like I'm not going to build a feature just so a few of you can use it and confuse everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that's very, very tempting when you do a startup, is to try and put too many features in.
Mm.
My classic example from this is my very first true kind of .com startup was a bed and breakfast search engine. And I was a contractor working in the UK market at the time, which basically meant I was spending a lot of time in London. I was looking for bed and breakfast, and I thought, hey, this would be really cool. Nobody does this at the moment. If I search for bed and breakfast, I search for bed and breakfast London. London's a bit big. I want to be more precise than that. So we'll break it down. And hey, actually, it'd be really cool if I could say I want to be near Paddington Station, or I want to be near Chalk Farm Tube Station. So it'd be great if I could search by tube station, or mainline railway station, or motorway junction. So I insisted we built all these things, and about 80% of our development time went into this really great, amazing search engine that you could put in town, you could put in the sub-district, you could put in county, you could put in train station, tube station, motorway junction. That website was used by millions of people over the subsequent 5 years. The only person that ever used that search was me. And we put, we're software engineers, so we logged everything. So we had all the data that showed that 80% of our development time went on a feature that only I ever used. So I learned the lesson the hard way there.
Whenever I flew into London, I wanted to stay near Paddington because of the express.
Well, it would just have been you and me then, but
Yeah.
80% of our development effort, and we delayed our launch by months building all of this at the time. Like I say, hardly anyone used it. So now I'm very much of, talk to customers and do that validation we talked about, and think about what you really need, and maybe launch with less and add in things when people push for them, when you get that pull from the market.
That does make me think of a distinction that I've discovered recently as well. There's a lot of talk about overbuilding, overengineering, and like why are you spending so much time building? You should be spending like 30% of your time marketing, maybe 60%. And I got through this sort of like imposter syndrome, or sort of like feeling a bit lost, because I was no, this isn't ready. I can't release this in the state that it's in. I would like to have released a couple of weeks ago, but like I can't right now. And I've come to the realization that there is a vast difference between testing and building features. And like the reason that I'm not comfortable with releasing right now is because I know that it's probably not high quality enough in the features that I have, and that there are easy ways to get yourself into a bad situation. I want to iron those out, not add any new capabilities, but just make sure that the things that you can do are as good as I can make them within reason, so that people have a good, positive first experience.
Cool. So on that note, then, have you got any customers yet? Are you at the point where you've got people testing it, or are you still building?
Customers know, working on some POCs at the moment. Had a series of people trying out an alpha version, which I've now like more or less completely replaced for reasons we discussed earlier on. Looking to put out an open source version soon, so it's a lot easier for people to try it out and provide that feedback, and so I can connect with people to have those conversations.
That sounds positive, though. You've got people using it and giving you that feedback and telling you they're either going to keep using it or they're binning it because it's not working, not doing what they want. So
yeah,
that sounds positive. And what are you building all this in? What's your tech stack?
So primarily Go. I've been using that language for nearly 10 years now. Love it. It's very comfortable for me. I've actually got to the point where I'm like doing my front end in Go, which is a little bit esoteric, but there's actually some really good tooling for doing that. In terms of storage, right now I'm focused on Git as a storage medium. So like all of the state that I'm working with is being stored in a Git repo that's is pushed to automatically by the tooling. I've had some requests to support storage buckets, so I'll be looking at that soon. I went through a period where I was using Postgres. I will go back to Postgres again at some point when I'm building the hosted version or rebuilding that. But I found that it's very easy to spend a lot of time messing around with schemas and not really getting anything done when you're working in a relational database, and like overthinking the relationships between all the different objects, and then realizing you've got to change everything. Very time consuming. So I ended up doing a very, very simple model where it's more of a key value store type thing, similar to the sorts of things you might do with Redis or etcd, where you just have a URI that describes a thing, includes a reference to your repo, to the path within the repo, and then all of the data after the version. So you can refer to pretty much anything in the state store using one of these URIs, and you can even use a fragment to go into the object and pull out a specific string, which has been a hell of a lot easier to write, but also created something that's a lot more powerful for the end user.
Cool. So I'm going to go back to that front end. You like your front end in Go. So what exactly do you mean by that? What front end do you have this? Is this a CLI-based tool, or do you have a web-based front end?
So right now, the open source tool is primarily CLI-based, but it has a few web endpoints for visualizing complex things. So if you're building up a deployment pipeline, you can visualize that in a web browser. I'm also looking at visualizing relationships between packages based on their dependencies, and maybe even visualizing all of the state. So, just start a command, it will kick off a web server locally, and you can just open that in your browser.
Cool. So is that web front end then being built actually in Go as well?
Yeah. So I'm using what's been referred to as the Goth stack, which is like Go, Tailwind, HTMX, and Temple. That's it. That was the name of the tool, which is kind of like JSX but for Go.
Right. Cool. I haven't come across that before and used that. So would you recommend it? Is it been a good experience, bad experience?
I definitely recommend it. Yeah, it's so being able to break everything down into components, I think, is a really powerful model, a powerful abstraction. Whereas working with the built-in HTML templating, you're kind of doing most of a page at a time, and you've got to, there's also sort of like the DSL for the templating, which can be a bit of a context switch. Whereas with Temple, it's a lot closer to the sort of experience that you have in React, where you're sort of, you're just interspersing your Go with some HTML to build out these templates.
Interesting. When I get a moment, I'm going to have to play with that, learn a bit more about it. No, I'd be more interested if there's a punk rock stack though than Goth.
We can come up with a bunch of acronyms for these, I'm sure. There's probably an emo stack out there somewhere as well.
Have to have a dark mode then, I guess.
Yeah, so yes, it was.
Okay, cool. Is there anything else we should talk about, Tom? Anything else you'd like to share about your experience building Ocuroot?
I guess you mentioned dark mode. I should probably talk about my travails with that.
Go on then. Tell me about dark mode and your love or hate for it.
So, I mean, I like dark mode. I'll enable the dark mode in a tool. I have the dark mode turned on in my IDEs, all that kind of thing. I think the somewhat religious fervor that you get around needing a dark mode is kind of interesting. Like you see, I've seen a lot of issues on GitHub repos that are just like dark, full stop, mode, full stop. And that's all they say, right? And it's like actually surprisingly hard to do switchable dark and light mode well. Like there's frameworks that make it, they provide some of the tooling there. I kind of fell foul of like using something that I could edit myself, so I ended up breaking dark mode. But like having to have it pervasive throughout everything that you're doing, And having it look good in both modes is like really, really tricky. I can see why like designers get paid. It's like it's something you've got to put a lot of thought into. And I've had, initially I was very keen on having dark mode from the get go. And I had some issues where someone would say, "Oh, if I go into dark mode, this one heading of this one table is not in dark mode, but the text changed, so now all the text is invisible." I'm like, "Well, that's just great." Uh, so, it's something that I really, really want to do, but like, darn, is it ever time consuming?
You remind me why I like systems programming and building back-end and data engineering systems. Don't have to deal with any of that the GUI side, and makes life a lot simpler.
It's a lot easier to check that the output's correct as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I like output that I can programmatically check.
Yeah.
Cool. So what next for Ocuroot? Where are you going next? When's the launch? When can people start trying it? And who should be starting to try it and following you?
Oh yeah. Those are good questions. I guess so next step is definitely this open source release. Pushing to get it out as soon as possible, but I also want it to be good. So I've not put a specific date on it, but I do. I post about what I'm doing pretty regularly. So I'm doing an open stand up on Blue Sky. So talking about like every single weekday, I'll post a little snippet of what the classic stand up. What did I do yesterday? What am I doing today? What's blocking me? Trying to be a bit more fun than that. People who I think would find this interesting. Anyone who's been frustrated with their existing CI setup first, give it a try. Let me know what you think. Is it solving any of your problems? Is it not? Those are great conversations to have as we discussed. But I'm mostly targeting people with, sort of like mid-sized companies, B2B, wrestling with large numbers of environments. They've got a lot of engineers to satisfy, but they're not really in a position to completely build something in-house.
Right, awesome. Let's hope if there's anybody listening that fits that, they can reach out and get in touch and start giving it a go. Cool. And where can people follow you, Tom? Apart from Blue Sky?
Yeah, so, on Blue Sky, I'm telliott.me, 2 L's and 2 T's. I'm sure you've felt the pain of people missing a T off of your surname as well. Also on Ocuroot.com. I've got a blog there that I post to bi-weekly. I also post on Substack on the Friday deploy. And I love connecting with people on LinkedIn. So if anyone wants to look me up there, I'd love to chat.
Okay, cool. And we'll put all those links in the show notes and in the YouTube notes as well. So anybody that wants to check them and make sure they got the spelling right and includes the 2 T's, we'll link them correctly there. All right, great, Tom. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I had a great time.